Hi, this is Stuart Talley. I am the partner here responsible for the defective hip litigation, including the DePuy Pinnacle litigation. The reason we're doing this video today is to provide an update on the ongoing trial in the DePuy Pinnacle metal-on-metal hip litigation that is currently pending now in Dallas, Texas. The first case to go to trial is the case that's being tried right now. It involves a woman named Kathleen Paoli. Miss Paoli had her hips put in. She had actually a metal-on-metal pinnacle on each side, right and left. They failed. They both had to be replaced. This is the first case of more than 6,000 that is going to be tried to a jury. It's being tried in federal court in Dallas, Texas. The outcome of this case is very important for all the other cases. These kinds of cases where you have one of thousands, the very first case to go to trial, we often call it a bellwether trial or a test case. And the idea is that you shouldn't have to have 6,000 jury trials. If you have one or two or maybe five, it all depends. At some point, you reach a point where everybody has enough knowledge that you should be able to settle the rest of the cases. So these are very important trials in the overall litigation. So getting back to Miss Paoli's case, she was an individual who had a condition known as congenital hip dysplasia. She was in her 40s, and dysplasia is essentially a deformity of the hip joint. The bones aren't formed properly. And it's a very common condition, and many people have to have hip replacement surgery for this condition. Because she was so young, the decision was made to put in a metal-on-metal pinnacle hip. She had one put in on each side, right and left. And after a while, she had heard about problems that people were having with metal-on-metal hips. She had some pain in some of those hips, so she had her blood tested. And when her blood test results came back, it was shocking. Her cobalt levels were over 400 parts per billion. Normal cobalt in a person is less than 1 part per billion. 400 is extremely high. After these results came back, the decision was made to revise the hip, both hips. Now, with respect to Miss Paoli's case, it is somewhat unique, and it's unique in a certain way. The hips that were put in, and the doctors who put them in apparently have admitted this, have said that the hips were put in at basically what's called an extreme angle. So these hips, you have the ball and you have the cup, and what's important when you put in a hip is that the cup be at the right angle. And so there's two angles. The cups go up and down, and they go forward and backwards, okay? And the manufacturer gives some guidance on the angle of the cup, but the most important thing for the surgeon is they want to put the cup in at an angle that will ensure that the hip is stable so that it doesn't dislocate down the road. So because of Miss Paoli's congenital hip dysplasia, her hips were put in at sort of an unusual angle. They were steeper than they were in most people. So she had the hip put in, had it revised. When it was revised, the first one that was revised, the surgeon replaced the metal liner with a plastic liner, but left the hip at the extreme angle, okay? With the second hip, the surgeon actually replaced the cup entirely. And when he replaced the second hip, he changed the angle of the cup. So after both revisions, Miss Paoli had a hip that was at an extreme angle and a hip that was at a more neutral angle, both with plastic liners, okay? So what happens is we go on down the road, and this case has been pending for a while, and just a few months ago, Miss Paoli was doing fine, and then suddenly she had a catastrophic failure on the hip that remained at the bad angle, or at the extreme angle. What happened was the plastic liner inside that hip shattered, and she needed another surgery. So this is an individual who's had 5 hip surgeries since she developed these hip problems. So today we had opening arguments, and that's the time in the case where the plaintiff's attorneys and the defense attorneys basically tell the jury what they think the evidence is going to show in the case. Mark Lanier is the plaintiff's attorney in this case. He's one of the finest attorneys in the country. Very well-known trial attorney who has lots and lots of big verdicts. Mr. Lanier did an unbelievable job in his opening. He really focused the case on the marketing for the Pinnacle. He talked about how surgeons were essentially told that this Pinnacle hip, this metal-on-metal Pinnacle, was indestructible. In their advertising, they told surgeons that 99.9% of the hips that were put in were still there. Okay? So basically, they were telling surgeons that the failure rate on the hip was 0.1%. All right? Now, the truth was that the failure rate of the Pinnacle was closer to 15%, not 0.1%, according to Mr. Lanier. Ms. Lanier also talked about numerous documents and witnesses that he's going to present that will establish that DePuy knew this hip had a very high failure rate, knew it was not as good as the metal on plastic hips, but hid this from the medical community. They did everything they could to prevent this information from getting out. And that's really the heart of the plaintiff's case here. The idea that surgeons were lied to about this hip, information about its dangers were kept from the public, that's really the core of his case. Now, the defense attorney had a different take, obviously. When the defense attorney gave his opening statement, he basically told the jury to ignore all the marketing stuff. Don't worry about the marketing. Don't worry about the failure rate. You don't need to know any of that information. What's important to know from the defense standpoint is that these cups were put in at an extreme angle. And no matter what kind of liner she had in the cup, whether it was metal or plastic, she was going to have problems anyway. And the reason, or at least the reason that they say is the most important evidence that supports that, is the fact that the hip that had a plastic liner, the one that failed recently, was at an extreme angle. And so in the defendant's mind, that's proof that it didn't matter what kind of hip she had, she was going to have these surgeries and problems anyway. So in essence, what the defense attorney has done is he is blaming the surgeons. He's blaming the surgeon and saying that the surgeon put it in at an extreme angle, that one of the things he said was that all surgeons know that there is what's called a safe zone, and that's a sort of a range of angles that you can put these hips in where you're not going to have any problems, and that the surgeon who put in Miss Paoli's hip violated that sort of well-known fundamental rule. So that's sort of where we are right now in the case. The first witness that the plaintiffs are going to call is an individual named Andrew Ekdahl, who is the CEO of DePuy. He was heavily involved in the hips, the development of the hips, the marketing of the hips. And so we're going to hear from him tomorrow. And then as the trial progresses, okay, tune into our website. We're going to try and give updates on a regular basis. We're monitoring the trial. We will give video updates as big things happen during the trial, so stay tuned. Now, if you have a Pinnacle hip and you want some more information about the litigation, how it's progressing, or if you want to know whether you have a claim or a right to reimbursement, feel free to give us a call. You can reach us at the phone number on the screen, or you can visit our website and fill out one of our online forms.